On this episode of the Athletic Acuity Sports Podcast, I'm going to be going over a little NHL Playoff Preview, previewing the series, looking at some betting angles, and then at the end I'm going to go over some futures bets that I think make sense for this tournament. I'm recording this in the morning on August 11th. The first playoff game is not set to start till the early afternoon, so hopefully I can get the video up before that game starts. So I'm going to start out with Vegas against Chicago. This is an interesting series. Vegas is heavily favored. They're minus 250. Chicago, I'm seeing around plus 200, plus 210 to win this series. I think what the Blackhawks did in the qualifying round was really admirable. They took advantage of an Edmonton team that was really sloppy defensively and had some problems at goaltending. I think this Blackhawks core is a fun one to root for. I think it's cool that they're back in the playoffs, and I think they'll be a frisky team moving forward. They do have a lot of offensive output. I think that they've got a good set of top three lines to produce scoring. Where the Blackhawks, I think, are a little bit shorthanded is defensively. I think their group of defensemen is definitely one of the weakest of the remaining teams. And a lot of it will boil down to whether or not Crawford can play pretty well, because he looked good at times in the Edmonton series. The issue for the Blackhawks, I think, going into this series is that Vegas is a lot more structured defensively than Edmonton was. And Vegas also, I think, has two goalies who are both better than any goalie that Edmonton was using in that series against Chicago. And to go along with that, even though, McDavid and Draisaitl individually may be better than any forward the Golden Knights have three full lines of good scoring. I'm very impressed with the way this team has been put together. I think the Golden Knights have about 9 forwards who could pass off as top 6 forwards. I really like the Robin Lehner, Marc-Andre Fleury goalie combination. I think you could argue those are 2 of the top 15 goalies in the league right now. And I've been really impressed for the past 2 years, and especially more recently with Shea Theodore. I think he's really come into his own as one of the 10 or 12 best defensemen in the league. And the Golden Knights do have some depth on the blue line as well. So I'm going to get to Vegas later in the video when it comes to futures bets. I think that that's kind of the angle you want to go at. For this particular series, I think the Golden Knights are going to win, but I think minus 250 is, a steep price to pay for any team to win a series. So I don't think that there's really a lot of value in betting Vegas minus 250 to beat the Blackhawks. I'm going to get to the Golden Knights later with some futures bets that I think make more sense for them. Interestingly, I think Alex Tuch's wicked no-look shot in overtime against Colorado actually might make a bigger impact on how the cards fall in the Western Conference than people realize. So Colorado is now matched up with Arizona instead of Chicago. Colorado has the same odds to win their series as Vegas does. Colorado's minus 250, Arizona, I'm seeing it plus 210. And in my opinion, I think Arizona is a much more difficult team to play right now than the Chicago Blackhawks are. I actually think this is a trap series for Colorado. I like Arizona plus 210. I think that's a good bet to make. I think they should be less of a favorite than they are, the Avalanche. And when you look at the Coyotes, I know that John Chayka had the mysterious exit recently. I'm not sure what he's planning on doing next, but I really like the way he built this team. I think he brought this team from really being a miserable mess to being a really solid group. I think the Coyotes have 6 defensemen who can play top 4 minutes. They have great defensive depth. Offensively, they're a little bit limited, but they do have some big names. Kessel and Taylor Hall with Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz. I think they've got some guys at the top who could step up and help them out. But more importantly, the Coyotes have 5 or 6 forwards who I think could pass off as second or third line guys, kind of, chipping in here and there. I think the Coyotes have good scoring depth. They're not overly reliant on one line. And then to top it all off, I think Darcy Kemper is one of the best goalies in the league right now, and he's playing for a really well-structured and coached team with a really good blue line. They have Antti Ranta as a pretty solid backup. I think this Coyotes team is really good. I've been saying this for a little while now, but the Coyotes, they remind me a little bit of the LA Kings, except probably a weaker version, because I don't think there's a true Doughty or a Kopitar on this team, but I think they play with that kind of structure. They play with a lot of depth. They've got a really balanced lineup, and I just think this Coyotes team is one where I think they're more suited to be good in the playoffs than they are in the regular season. It didn't surprise me at all that they knocked out Nashville, and I think they are a sneaky upset candidate to beat Colorado. I think anytime in the playoffs you're going against maybe the best goalie in the world for that given time, it's a little bit of a red flag. I think the Avalanche could definitely get through this, but this is not the first round series that I think they wanted. So next up, it's Dallas against Calgary. I'm seeing Dallas favored slightly in this series, anywhere from -120 to -140. Calgary, I've seen it +120. I've also seen them down at even money. I don't have a great feel for this one. To me, there's no betting advantage here. The Stars have some mysterious injuries. I don't know if Sagan or Bishop is going, if those guys are going to be playing against Calgary in this series. I don't particularly trust the Flames either. I think, Talbot has had a nice little resurrection here this season, but ultimately I don't know if I love betting on Cam Talbot in a playoff series. And quite frankly, this whole Flames team, they impressed me. I thought Winnipeg would do better in that series against Calgary, but Calgary doesn't have a great track record of playing well in the postseason with this particular core group. So I'm going to lay off this series. I think Dallas is a little bit undermanned. If I had to pick a side, I do think Dallas will win the series, but again, it's a little bit fishy with the Bishop and Sagan injuries right now. And so the last series in the first round for the West, St. Louis is favored pretty heavily against Vancouver. St. Louis -200, Vancouver around +170. I thought Vancouver looked pretty good against Minnesota. The issue is that Minnesota was really starting a backup goalie for the entirety of the series, so I don't know if Vancouver really looked great or if it was just kind of a function of the Wild not being that great of a team. So the Blues lost all three of their qualifier round games. I'm not too concerned about the Blues. I think going into this series, this is a pretty classic situation where St. Louis is the calm, collected, experienced team going in. Vancouver is the upstart, kind of frisky team going in. The Blues are on a losing streak. The Canucks have looked good recently. I think I'm going to favor the Blues to win this. I do not like -200. I think that's a little bit too high of a price to pay to bet on the Blues. So I would lay off this series from a betting angle, but I do think that there are some futures bets with the Blues that I like. All right, jumping over to the Eastern Conference. So Philadelphia won the 1 seed, and they are -240 against Montreal. Montreal's around +200 to win this series. So I think the Flyers deserve a lot of credit. I like the way this team has been built. I think Chuck Fletcher made a couple of good, subtle moves in the offseason, bringing in Niskanen, bringing in Justin Braun. This team has gotten a good contribution out of Konechny, who took a big step this year. And I think that they have some good depth, and I like them as a team. But with all of that being said, I think Montreal is the move here. I think Montreal +200 actually, to me, is a decent bet to make. I think Philadelphia is pretty fraudulent for a 1 seed. They remind me a little bit of like Calgary last year, where Calgary was the 1 seed in the West, and everyone could kind of agree that they didn't think Calgary was really the best team. And I feel similarly with Philadelphia. I find it bizarre that the Flyers are the favorites to win the Eastern Conference. I find it bizarre that the Flyers are one of 3 teams as the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. I just feel like with a goalie as young as Carter Hart, it would just surprise me a lot. I'm not saying they can't do it. I think Carter Hart has a high ceiling, and I think the Flyers are going to be good for a while. But to me, the Canadiens at plus 200 make a little bit more sense. So going into that series with Pittsburgh, I thought Carey Price was stepping in as like an average-ish goalie. He didn't look particularly great to me in any portion of the past, few seasons, but he was unbelievably good in that series against Pittsburgh. And I think Montreal actually beat a pretty darn good team in the Penguins in that first round. They did it in 4 games. I don't think it was a complete fluke. I think if Carey Price continues to play as well as he did, the Flyers are going to have some problems. I don't love this bet, but I think if you sprinkle a little bit on plus 200 for the Canadiens, that would be the right side to go on, in my opinion. So next up, we've got Tampa Bay against Columbus. Tampa Bay is pretty heavily favored at minus 225 in this series, Columbus plus 185. So I don't really see a betting advantage with these two particular teams. I still like Tampa Bay in the long run, and I'm going to talk about some of their futures bets at the end of this video. The Victor Hedman injury is concerning. The way he went down against Philadelphia, it's unclear how much time he's going to miss. But based on what it sounds like so far, they haven't ruled him out for any extensive amount of time yet. Stamkos seems to be the one who's going to miss more time, but I think that's fine because if I'm Tampa Bay, I'd much rather play without Stamkos than Hedman. This team doesn't have that good of depth on defense, but they do have a ton of guys who can make up for the scoring that they lose with Stamkos. So it's interesting. Tampa Bay is kind of going into this series, and it's like, well, Columbus is the team that kind of humiliated us last year. I think if the Lightning can just power through here, maybe, play a couple good games without Hedman the first couple games of the series, I think the Lightning could kind of find a rhythm, and, it might be the case where this first series is the hardest one for them, and if they can get over this obstacle and beat Columbus and kind of, slay the demon of last year, especially if they can do it a little shorthanded with a little bit of adversity, this is a good opportunity, I think, for the Lightning to kind of fight back a little bit, show some resiliency. So I don't feel great about the individual series. I think Tampa Bay might be favored by a little bit too much, but I think Tampa Bay as a futures bet makes some sense. And I think the Lightning, if they can get past this first series, I do think they will be a team to look out for this year as a potential deep playoff run candidate. All right, next up we've got Washington favored against the New York Islanders. I see the Capitals here at minus 180 to win this series, the Islanders at plus 160. I really like the Islanders at plus 160. I think, just looking at Washington a little bit, and I do like this team. I think offensively this team is very gifted. They're a little thinner on the blue line than they've been in years past. What it really comes down to for me is that I don't love this goalie situation for the Capitals. Braden Holtby really did not play very well during the 2019-2020 regular season. He had some moments where he looked okay in this qualifying round, round robin thing that the Capitals were in. But I think there's a problem with their goaltending right now. I think they're in the midst of a transition. I think Ilya Samsonov is going to end up starting for this team eventually, and I think Holtby is on a declination. On the flip side, I'm looking at the Islanders. They looked really solid against Florida. Barry Trotz playing his old team. I think you could make the argument he's one of the best coaches in the NHL right now. I just think the Islanders are really disciplined. They're really well organized. And, we saw them perform really well against Pittsburgh in the first round last year. They looked good against Florida. The Islanders are more of a playoff type of team. They've got really good scoring depth. They're not overly reliant on one guy. I like their blue line depth. I think Varlamov could be the best goalie in this series potentially. And I think Greiss is fine as a backup, given that the Islanders play with so much defensive structure. So the Islanders just strike me as a good playoff team. I like them at plus 160 to pull off this series. And honestly, when I look at the Capitals, it wouldn't shock me if they won this series, but I would be mildly surprised if the Capitals ended up going all the way. Despite all their experience, I just don't really feel it with this team this year. I think the goaltending is a little bit too unstable right now. All right, in the final series of the first round, we've got Boston favored against Carolina. So the Bruins lost all 3 of their round-robin games. Carolina swept the Rangers very impressively. The Hurricanes have had some time to rest. The Bruins are only minus 150 in this series. The Hurricanes are plus 130. So I went back and forth because I actually like both of these teams. I think the winner of this series has a pretty good chance of winning the next series and going to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think these are 2 of the better teams in the East right now, and I think they're both built pretty well for playoff hockey. If I have to pick a side in this particular first round series, I do see a little bit of value with Carolina at plus 130. I think Carolina is really good. When I look at the Hurricanes, I love the way this team has been built by the Carolina front office. I think they've done such a good job. Carolina really was smart in a sense because they fixed their goaltending by improving their defensemen. Instead of paying a goalie a ton of money, they decided to just get a bunch of great defensemen. And when I look at this Hurricanes blue line right now, Dougie Hamilton and Brett Pesce are probably the first and third, respectively, defensemen on this team, and they're both out with injury, and yet this Carolina team still has 7 defensemen who I think are worthy of playing top 6 minutes. Slavin's been great. Brady Shea and Sami Vatanen were both pretty good additions. It's good to have bodies back there. Edmondson has been solid. Trevor Van Riemsdyk, Jake Gardner, Hayden Fleury, all guys you can play on your bottom pair and feel pretty good about it. I think Mrazek and Reimer are both guys who have shown some flashes of being pretty good at times, and I think in a situation where they've got so many good defensemen around them and, the Hurricanes aren't giving up a ton of, chances against the goalie, I think this Hurricanes team is just really solid, and, you're seeing Mrazek and Reimer play pretty well. In addition to that, one thing Carolina has this year that they didn't have last year, Andrei Svechnikov has really come through, and he's a really good player. He's a great match with Aho on the first line. Tara Vinan's continued to be good. They have scoring depth. I think they have some depth scorers that are pretty good as well. I just really like this Carolina team. I don't know if I see them as a cup contender necessarily, but if this team upset Boston and just went back to the Eastern Conference Finals again, it wouldn't shock me too much. And so, again, I think the winner of this series between Boston and Carolina is poised to go pretty far. I think these are 2 of the better teams in the East right now, and they're playing each other in the first round. All right, now going to some futures bets. Starting out with the Western Conference, the Vegas Golden Knights winning the West at plus 250. They are the favorites to come out of the West right now. Personally, I bet on Vegas quite a while ago, back when they were struggling earlier in the regular season, because I knew that this team was a lot better than what they were showing early in the season. But at plus 250 right now, I don't hate it. It's a little bit, worse of a price than where you could have had them. But I do think the Golden Knights are in a position where they probably should be favored. They've got a lot of experience. I really like their depth, and I think Leonard was a tremendous addition. I can't say enough how much I think Leonard makes a difference for this team, just as, an insurance policy when it comes to, having Leonard and Fleury. It really makes a difference for this team moving forward. And again, I think just looking at how the cards kind of fell here, I think that Alex Tuch goal in overtime is going to mean something. I think Colorado against Arizona is really good news for the Golden Knights. I think Chicago's an easier team to play right now than Arizona is. And so Vegas winning the West at plus 250, I think makes a lot of sense. The other team that I like to come out of the West, the Blues are plus 450. And, I know they lost all 3 of their round-robin games, but the Blues have been a pretty good, quiet, consistent team for a long time. They are the defending Stanley Cup champions, and I think Binnington is kind of one of those guys who can just kind of turn it on at any given moment. And I love the Blues blue line. I think they have 8 defensemen who could play top 6 minutes. I think they've got 5 guys who can play top 4 minutes. I think it's a really well-constructed team. I think the scoring is good enough, and I think the Blues are just a little bit undervalued. So if you wanted to hedge with Vegas by taking St. Louis at plus 450 as well, I think it makes a lot of sense. So the Eastern Conference is a little bit trickier. There's no team that I love to come out of the East. I think Philly's a little bit fraudulent for a 1 seed. I think Tampa Bay, with their injuries, are in kind of a precarious position. Washington has their goaltending issues, and then you've got Boston and Carolina kind of playing each other in the first round. So when I look at this Eastern Conference, I think it's a little bit more wide open than the West. I think the team that's a little bit devalued right now in terms of, realistic odds to win the Eastern Conference is Tampa Bay. They've slid down to plus 350. Philadelphia is actually now the favorite to win the Eastern Conference, which to me is very surprising. I know they've played well against good teams, and I know they looked really sharp in that round robin thing, but I think we're being a little bit prisoner of the moment-ish with the Flyers. I think Tampa Bay, if Hedman were to come back in the 4th game of the series against Columbus, I trust the Lightning to be able to win without Stamkos. And I think the Lightning do have the most well-rounded roster of any team in the Eastern Conference right now. They have great scoring depth, which is, unlike a team like Boston, who's very reliant on their top line. And, if Hedman's back there, I think their defensive depth is good enough as long as they keep Hedman healthy. And, without Hedman having any, long-term injury label placed on him yet, I'm going to assume that he's going to try to come back sooner rather than later. And again, as I already mentioned, I think the Lightning are, one of those teams where they've disappointed people for a long time. But 2 years ago, the Capitals were able to, end the suffering and win their Stanley Cup. Last year, the Blues overcame their obstacles and were able to win. I think people overvalue playoff failures a little bit. It doesn't mean that you can't win a cup just because you've had struggles in big moments. And I think Tampa Bay can come back and be a really good team. And I see them as the best value of any team in the East right now at plus 350. 2 other smaller bets I would make, I'd put more money on Tampa Bay than these other 2 teams, but I think I would just sprinkle a tiny bit on Boston to win the East at plus 375 and Carolina to win the East at plus 750. It wouldn't shock me if either of those 2 teams were able to win a couple series here. Again, I think the fact that they're playing each other kind of hurts each of them, but I really like the way Boston and Carolina have both been built. And this is kind of a wacky Eastern Conference this year. So if weird things happen and Columbus does pull off another upset against Tampa Bay and, Philadelphia gets upset by Montreal and the Capitals are kind of, insecure about their goaltending, this Boston-Carolina series could go a long way. So I like tiny bets on Boston and Carolina to win the East. I think Tampa Bay, though, is the best bet to make of any of these teams in the Eastern Conference. And then finally, the Stanley Cup Finals. Winning the Stanley Cup, I think there's 3 teams that I see pretty clearly as good values. Vegas to win the Stanley Cup at plus 600, I think makes a lot of sense. I think they've got a path that's pretty clear. I think they need to get through potentially the winner of that Colorado-Arizona series, but I definitely think that they have what it takes to go to the Stanley Cup Finals, and plus 600 to me makes a lot of sense for them. I like Tampa Bay at plus 700 to win the Cup. I think if the Lightning are able to fight back against the Blue Jackets and win potentially without Hedman, Hedman could come back at some point down the road, maybe late in that series against Columbus or maybe, before their second round series. I think the Lightning, if they can get over that first obstacle, things could get easier for them. I could see them going the distance this year. I think they are a very talented team. And then lastly, I've got the Blues at plus 1100. I think it's weird that the Blues are ranked this low. When I look at the Blues, I just think they're undervalued. I'm looking at their blue line. I love the defensemen they've got. I think they've got so much depth on the blue line. Binnington, I think, is a really solid goalie, and I wouldn't be shocked if he came back and played really well. I think the scoring is good enough, and this team has a lot of experience. They have practically the same group they did last year, and they are the defending Stanley Cup champions. It's weird to me that they are 11-1 to win the Stanley Cup. I think that there's a little bit of value on that if you want to hedge for Vegas and Tampa Bay. So that's all for this episode of the Athletic Acuity Sports Podcast. Thanks for listening.